Rise. We're an autonomous end-to-end drone inspection platform that targets or focuses on the aviation industry specifically at this moment, as well as the space industry, which is kind of new for us. So essentially what we do is that we've developed a solution or platform that is able to navigate in a GPS-denied environment, i.e. the hangars, in order to perform fuselage inspections in about, more than a third, and less than a third of the time that it typically takes traditional inspection methods. A little bit about my background. I'm a former Google engineer on Google Cloud, and gained a lot of my experience and expertise in different facets of my life, including like while in college, working in several Fortune 500 companies, including American Express and Charles Schwab, as well as maintenance, repair, and overhaul facility based in Arizona. So what we're doing is I'd say it's pretty cool. It's definitely very, very challenging. And so I appreciate being a part of this panel and seeing if anyone has any questions, or even could be potentially benefit one another. So Mark, is there anything else you think I should talk about, or is that a good?
Colby, I think that's a good start here. I wanted to just point out, I have a number of people on the stage here who have been regular parts of our Aviation Aerospace Club in the past, and maybe not immediate experts, let's say, in urban air mobility, but I've asked them to be part of the conversation because there's opportunities to have discussions on other things, like Larry, for example, in digital transformation. Mike comes from the aerospace industry and providing support of companies in the aerospace industry. And so I'll kind of leave those for a second, Colby, and I wanted to introduce one other person and then see if we could start taking some questions. But Kai Si Lin, I wanted to ask you if you could introduce yourself. And I'm sorry if I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly or not, but I'd like for people to know who you are and what you're doing in the industry, please.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Mark, for introducing me. And I'm Kaita, and I'm the COO and co-founder of Velvet Industries. And we are a UK-based startup that is aiming for providing urban air mobility solutions, including the urban aircrafts and transport systems and infrastructure. So basically, we are developing this starting from redefining the urban aircrafts, which is, we're calling it a VOLAR. And basically, we are trying to create the vehicle that is compact and it's eco-friendly, and it's basically having no exposed propellers or fixed wings. So we're trying to really create something that's beneficial for urban environment. And I'm really open to talk to people and answer questions or having discussions with all of you.
Hey, that's great. Thanks for the quick introduction. Hey, just wanted to mention, I also see a number of others of you that I invited out in the audience. If you do have something you want to say, just raise your hand and I'll bring you up here. But why don't we just try to kick this room off and see if we can't get some questions and conversations going. How about anybody on the panel up here? If you have any questions, for Colby or for Kasi or anybody else, let's see if we have some questions out there. Go ahead and if you're on the panel, just unmute yourself and ask questions, or if you're in the audience, raise your hand and I'd love to bring you up to speak and ask questions.
So Colby, with your company, this is Mike with Hooks Lubricants, providing lubrication solutions into the manufacturing space. With your company, do you foresee any approvals needed for lubrication into the products that you guys are producing? And are you the end manufacturer of the product, or design and having someone else build for you?
No, that's great. No, great question. In terms of lubrication, I'm not really too sure, but in terms of where we are with manufacturing, we have developed and designed everything all in house, and we outsource our manufacturing to a local manufacturing company based out here in Austin. Out here in Austin, Texas. Yeah.
And when it comes to the design itself, do your engineers in-house spec out the different products used? And where that question derives from, when we talk about traditional aerospace manufacturing, the Boeings and the Airbuses of the world, they'll come in and spec out even on the fluids, on the machining aspect of it, what fluids can be used in those. And I don't know if air mobility has gotten to that level of sophistication in requiring those types of approvals. And if so, we would love to be on the starting, conversations around developing products.
Sure, no, and thanks for that. So, when a regulatory perspective, at least from the big OEMs, our drone is not technically really that big, so we don't have any lubricants that I mean, maybe except things to like typical like WD-40 and stuff for some of the moving components. But outside of that, we do require like regulatory approval for the use of the drone, especially let's say in active runways or getting into their the OEMs like SMM guidelines for maintenance repair. So those are things that I am working on in the short time. But in terms of lubrications, I'm not aware of any like large scale. We do a lot of 3D printing of our parts until moving into or additive manufacturing, I guess, until moving into potentially what is it called, the injection molds. So, but we definitely can connect and probably talk a little deeper so I can get a better understanding of what it is of the offer.
Sounds good. And just kind of elaborate on that, for maybe other folks that are on the call as well. During the recent landing on Mars, our company was involved with developing lubricants that actually went on to that level of sophistication. There was need for lubricants that would actually help keep the lubricants from spreading throughout the masked camera and obstructing the view. And so we got involved in the early stages of development on those. When it comes to, and in a drone, I would see, the greases, the sophisticated greases that would hold up and things like that. So yep, definitely we'll connect offline and talk about different things. Appreciate it, Colby.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it too. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, guys. Hey, I just brought up Brian. Brian raised his hand and he had some questions. Brian, is there something you'd like to ask the panel?
Hey, everybody. I just kind of wanted to join and say hi, maybe contribute a little bit where possible. I'm the managing editor of eVTOL.com. So, obviously we write about electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft and urban air mobility quite a bit. I had a question for Kaitsu. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I was looking over your website and I couldn't really get a sense of what the aircraft really is and how it works and what powers it. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the aircraft that you're designing?
Yeah, so as mentioned, so we are defining this kind of vehicle that's specifically for urban environments. So, our approach is that we want to really define the true demand and the needs of urban environments. So that's why we call it a VOLAR. We class it as a new category of vehicles, and it's having all the abilities of vertical takeoff and land, and and you're asking a very, very good question. So, we are hiding all the power system inside because we want to target at the urban environment. We want to keep everything safe and have the most acceptability for the public. So we are using actually like electric ducted fans for all the propulsion system, and so we're using electric powers, and we have some unique control methodology, so we can have a better controllability that allowing us to fly horizontally and with quite amount of lift being generated while we're cruising. But these are all things that we are exploring on our actual functional prototypes that has been developing in Dubai, and we are going to produce 2 to 3 more prototypes for testing and to optimize the lifts and to optimize the structure, and with the flight control logic being iterated, and we're also developing the development base here in Taiwan. So we are trying to allocate some work internationally in the UK, in Taiwan, and Dubai, and trying to put a lot of different technologies together. And yeah, there are going to be a lot of new reveals this year about some of our new technologies and some of our new designs, hopefully. And I hope this answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing a little bit about the aircraft you guys are working on, and best of luck. I look forward to if you guys are able to release any footage of it in flight. We in the press always love that. Always fun to look at and report on. Very cool. I guess I wanted to make a few comments, if you don't mind, about urban air mobility. I think that a lot of people have gotten very excited, and this space has attracted a lot of entrepreneurs via the promise of a massive potential market for aircraft that fly people around very quickly, whether it's in urban centers or between cities or what have you. We all know that congestion is a huge problem, so on and so forth. And so there's a massive TAM, a massive total addressable market here that has attracted a lot of aircraft development programs and a lot of money. But I think that a lot of times there's less nuance in the discussion between what aircraft designs are. Sorry, none of this, by the way, is intended to be a comment on Kaita and the Bellwether at all. Just generally speaking, just to be clear. I think there's sometimes a lot of mismatch between what aircraft and what power systems and what projects meet that actual market, potential market. And so there's a lot of interesting projects out there that are raising money and talking about this potential market that really don't have the fundamental characteristics necessary to meet it. And I just want to kind of throw that out there because I think it's important to have in this discussion.
Yeah, I think this is a very good point, and I would like to also comment on this because our approach might be slightly different from a lot of other companies talking about air taxis. Because as you can see, we are trying to make the design compact, and it looks quite different from other designs. The reason for that is we are doing a lot of research, and obviously, like I said, we are starting from the demand and from the actual market point of view. So we look into a lot of that. Like we know a lot of air taxi companies are trying to solve congestion problems, but
right.
in fact, when we look into the congestion problems, all these people, they are suffering, right? They drive, and they are not the people that will willingly to take public transport, and they are willing to. They're probably not that willing to share, and these people, and if you're talking about these people taking public transport, they are looking for lower prices for their transport. So, if we're talking about this kind of transportation that will maybe ease their transport, but it will raise the price, and they are probably not the true customers that we're looking at. And so we're trying to make it for private transport. And so this is why we are still focusing very much on the intercity transport, while some of the air taxi companies, they're transferring their aim from air taxis to regional transport, because the size will matter, and obviously the safety issues, and it's going to be very difficult. And obviously there are a lot of challenges, to be honest, but we are still thinking this is the very, very big market and the ultimate goals for all companies trying to achieve. And we are all dreaming of making people a civilization that can travel on three-dimensional basis. And so there are a lot of ways that we can achieve it. And also we're trying to develop a few different business models along the way, not just directly aiming at the ultimate goal, 10 years or 15 years directly and draining out all the resources, right? Maybe we can start off from creating some experiences or some sort of like regional transport, or there are entertaining functions. But these are all things that we might reveal in the near future, to explore different possibilities, or potentially like transport systems or infrastructure. Like I mentioned, we're not only talking about the vehicle itself, because if we're only talking about the vehicle, it's not, it cannot solely become an ecosystem. So there are a lot of
of course.
A lot of these partners will,
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say, if you guys can pull off the compact design without the exposed rotors, there's a lot of advantages to that. So best of luck.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey, Colby, this is Larry. Quick question for you. As someone who's kind of in the drone space and in kind of a specialized drone space, in that you guys operate the drones in a pretty confined environment. And I just wonder, do you think there's any lessons learned from the evolution of drones and using drones in a very, very controlled environment that is applicable to urban air?
That's a really, really great question, Larry. Thank you for that. And unfortunately, after this, I'll have to pop off for another meeting, I guess panel event. But I think there's quite a lot of lessons to be learned in urban air mobility. Because, for example, one of the biggest things that, kind of sets or differentiates what we do or with our drone platform as opposed to any of our competitors is that we utilize 3D LiDAR system on our drone, because that is honestly for machines since like that a very, very powerful tool for navigation, especially in environments that are compact and you don't have access to GPS. So I think with just camera-based systems could be challenging, and it's in the sense that if you're training any artificial intelligence or anything that's operating in environments it hasn't seen before, there's a higher chance for error. So I think in urban air mobility, especially we're talking about eVTOL systems like that, probably just like any other aircraft, they need to ensure that they are utilizing strong sensor solutions with a low failure rate to ensure they're meeting the safety metrics or criteria that's really important for this industry to continue its growth. So I think just taking in not taking in, but really thinking about, how are we training our artificial intelligence as well? If you say we're going to the autonomous route, and if we're not in urban air mobility, just ensuring that you're collecting data that can be applied to the entirety of your fleet or your of your fleet. So I think that's a good stopping point for me there. I hope that.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Perfect. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah. My pleasure. Again, Mark, sorry again. I'm going to have to hop off right now.
Yeah,
It
Colby,
was a pleasure speaking to everyone.
Yeah, Colby,
any other questions?
Well, I appreciate you joining. I just want to make sure before you jump off, if people wanted to look into, your company, where do they go to do that?
Sure. Yeah, you can. If anyone's interested in learning more from Rise, you can just find us on our website, just rise.io, or connect with us on LinkedIn, and even Twitter. So there's a couple of different avenues to get in touch with us.
Great. Thanks for joining, Colby. Hey, listen,
right.
I brought up another person from the audience, Ian. I'd really like to know about the things that you've been doing in urban air mobility and what your current project is. If you can, it'd be great if you could just give us a little briefing, Ian.
Yeah, not going to say too much about what I'm working on right now, but I've had experience in the space since 2017. My background's in aircraft design. I was at Uber Elevate and was the 7th employee there. So I have a pretty decent understanding of the space, but obviously it's still in its infant stages. So I raise my hand just to, pose questions and potentially also answer some that people may have. I was curious for Bellwether Industries, what was driving your overall footprint requirement. I find that most of the aircraft I've seen that have artificially limited themselves in span end up sacrificing a lot of performance.
Yeah, I think we're developing this, starting from trying to bring in the vehicle that can really adopt into city environments with the best compatibility to reduce the negative influence. So we do know the performance or the endurance or the energy efficiency. These are the things that a lot of companies that are putting into priority to develop. But we're starting from a very different approach, and it's also a very core concept for the companies that we are trying to bring in this logic of trying to find the true needs that can really bring in and to really match the market.
Wouldn't you say that using ducted fans in powered lift throughout your entire flight segment, wouldn't you say that that's more energy intensive and would result in worse unit economics flying in a city rather than passively generating lift off a wing.
Yeah, but the reason we're doing it is, we're trying to more thinking it from the environmental perspective, and we're definitely trying to we're not just talking about pushing it all the way with just purely the deductive stance, right? We're still trying to create lifts while we're cruising, and we're still achieving better controllability than all other kinds of vehicles due to the control logic we're using with the deductive stance. There are obviously advantages and disadvantages using different types of power sources, but we still need to find a compromise or balance or the priority targets that we are looking for. And
cool.
it's not and it's not saying that like we ignore all that, right? We're not saying we just don't care about the consumption of energy or the efficiency. There are still a lot of things that we will iterate. We will optimize on our all the power sources or the thrust that we can potentially generate or the power efficiency.
Well, I think you stand to gain 3.5x benefit just through span-wise lift and also a better moment arm on any ailerons you have out there. But yeah, interested in seeing your progress.
Yeah, thanks for asking those questions. I really appreciate it. Hey, just to sort of refresh or reset the room here real quick, I just want to let everybody know that this is the Aviation Aerospace Club, and we only just formed it over the weekend. We picked up a couple hundred followers over the weekend, and we decided over the next 3 weeks that we were going to focus on urban air mobility. And I did start a topic, which was, the market outlook, but it really wasn't intended to restrain the conversation. And we have a number of really good experts here, both from technology and experience and finance and investment in the audience, but I wanted to open up the stage again for questions for people, and I'm going to go to Andrew. We brought you up. Andrew, can you tell us about yourself and your interest in urban air mobility, and then any inputs or questions that you have?
Yeah, hey Mark, hey everyone, how you doing? Appreciate you bringing me up. Just wanted to maybe throw out a couple additional points just for consideration for discussion either today or maybe in the future. I think a lot of first of all, obviously an incredibly exciting emerging space here that it's really interesting and can provide a hell of a lot of benefits to society. A lot of the conversation is focused on the aircraft and some of the amazing component technology, to build, develop, and certify these aircraft. I think another thing that, is certainly worth focusing on as well is some of the other key parts of the value chain that are going to have to be put into place, really to I guess, enable the full value of urban air mobility or advanced air mobility to come to fruition. And some of those things are, things such as landing infrastructure, vertiports, as they're called. I work for a company right now called Skyports, which is focused on bringing that part of the value chain to bear, looking to build kind of optimized vertiport networks throughout cities and regions throughout the world. So, I think that's an important part. Obviously, there's other parts of the ecosystem around, software orchestration tools, air traffic management systems to integrate this into the existing commercial, air traffic and the national airspace system. So I think it's a great topic. Thanks for bringing everyone together, and just wanted to point out that it's truly going to take a village, so to speak, to bring advanced air mobility to market and to realize its full value.
Related to that, how do you feel about Archer's announcements in LA and Miami, Andrew?
Yeah, no, look, I think it's fantastic, and I think it kind of follows on the trend of what we're seeing with a lot of the OEMs. I think there's a few markets in the U.S. that are particularly attractive. We have relationships with a lot of the OEMs, and of the markets that we hear constantly is kind of top of the list. It's no surprise. It's LA, Miami, cities in Texas, generally areas where you've got, warm, consistent weather throughout the year. So weather impacts aren't too volatile. Obviously, there's very attractive markets like New York City and Chicago and some other massive metropolitan areas. The question is going to be from an operational perspective, how that impacts, the battery life cycles and recharging and all of that. So I think it kind of follows in line with what we've seen from the industry in general.
If you don't mind me jumping into something maybe more difficult. Hey, Andrew, by the way, how's it going? We were just emailing earlier. I'm curious what you think about funding sources. Talking about infrastructure and building out these networks. I think there have been different conversations, but mostly not in public, about how these things get funded. And I'm kind of curious, really thinking about whether or not there's going to be government involvement in the funding. There are some people that say, the market case, the investment case is good enough that there's no need for government investment here at all. I don't know whether that's something cities want. Do cities want it to be entirely privately funded? If government chooses to step in a big way, will it make a huge difference or not really? There's a lot of questions there, but pick and choose whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, certainly, Brian. That's not a softball. That's more of a hardball pitch there. Look, that's a broad topic. We could have an entire discussion on that one alone. What we believe clearly at Skyports. We are a company that has raised capital to privately address this issue. Now, obviously, we're open to partners in various business models, whether that's public or private. I think the question around whether or not local government or regional governments are going to be involved, I think we're seeing that varies by region. We are engaged in advanced air mobility projects globally. In certain regions, there is much more of an effort where they see the transportation system as being something that is, and the infrastructure around that as being, very, very core to what they as government kind of manage and invest in. So we're obviously engaging in those conversations. We feel clearly that there's a business case around it. Not only does it enable the industry, but we feel that building our view and the core tenets around it is around building open access vehicle agnostic verticals, which we think will help to essentially launch the initial commercial operations and get to scale more quickly versus having lots of different OEMs with lots of different landing facilities. I think we're also seeing a little bit where we're looking to create multimodal connections between other existing transportation infrastructure. That's where some of the public entities are wanting to engage with us a little bit more. So, again, that's just a very, very high level overview and some things that we could go down a rabbit hole on another call.
Yeah, I agree with you on most of those points, and yeah, it's going to play out very differently, I think, in different cities and different countries. One thing I think, a question for both you and Ian, and really anybody else that wants to jump in, but I wonder if people are underestimating what the end cost of energy to charge aircraft is going to be. Just thinking about how much heliports make today off of selling avgas at a very marked up cost. And they need to recoup that money somewhere, right? And the cost involved with, providing rapid charging capabilities and that sort of thing. I guess I'm just curious how people are thinking about that.
Yeah, so I'll take a first stab. I think now that Uber Elevate's not in the space, you lose a lot of the benefits you might have from a demand aggregator that could, get better electricity cost needs spread across not just eVTOL or UAM, but scooters, bikes, EVs. So that was part of the logic that went into a lot of the financial
that's
models.
A really good point.
Yeah, so kind of building on that multimodal argument, anyone that is trying to build out a true multimodal end-to-end mobility service, they'll be able to realize some efficiencies in costs from an electricity standpoint by nature of tying together multiple mobility services that plug into the grid. That being said, I would say a really good source to deep dive on this is the Black and Veatch paper that was published, I think, in 2018 or 2019 and funded by NASA. they did a really decent job at looking at how you can electrify urban assets and what it would take to stand up your, day one vertiports, which may be, on the order of 500 to 500 kilowatt to 1 megawatt overall power needs to, these more future looking vertiports that would be in the 2 megawatt to 10, even 12 megawatt class. And then, again, it's not like a clear cut, like, will it exist? Will it be economical or not? I think people need to think of this more in terms of like a ramp that isn't necessarily linear, and using their go-to-market strategies to shape that ramp, ideally in a way that gets your costs down as quickly as possible.
So, hey, everybody. One of the reasons that I started this room out asking the question of market outlook is, I knew that we would attract some people in here who have a better understanding of the market than most people listening in the space. And so I wanted to ask, the people that are in the room here today, if you could, comment a little bit on the market outlook. And let me tell you which specific pieces I'm looking at. Is that, I know that urban air mobility is growing, faster in certain areas of the world, of course, and it's going to be based on, acceptance. It's going to be based on demand. It's going to be based on capitalization. And, I was amazed when I started researching this subject a while back about how many entrants there are into the market and how many companies there are, focusing on it. And so I would really like to ask you guys to, sort of comment on the market outlook, maybe where it's going, where you think it'll grow, what will help it accelerate. I'd be interested in some insight into those different things from your perspective.
So I think it's definitely there. Joby to me looks most promising from a launch standpoint in the 2024 timeframe. I think there are going to be people that fast follow. They may include, folks like Archer or Whisk. There's also players like EHang and Volocopter in the space. I think there's a lot of open questions I have around their market economics, and whether or not their aircraft actually have legs, and if they've made the necessary upfront investments in other parts, the other adjacent services outside of just the airframe. But I think there's a lot of really great momentum for a service that will exist in the 2024 timeframe. It's not going to be this mass market service. It's going to be sort of limited operability between 2024 to the late 2020s, call it 2028 to 2030. I think by then a lot of the issues related to infrastructure, operations, airspace management, a lot of that will have had, from the 2024 to 2020 timeframe, time to really mature and improve, and to get a safety record in place effectively, or just proof points that show you can actually scale, and time required by each of these early players to really get skin in the game and make sure that they understand how to scale. And then 2030 onward, you're going to start seeing this service scale out more and more, especially as the economies of scale come into play.
Hey, Ian, just a little follow-up on that. What's the role of the regulators? You mentioned airspace control and infrastructure, and I just wonder, where the regulators stand in terms of engagement, or are they just kind of sitting back as usual and watching?
I think they're leaning in. Any serious player right now is already and has been in discussions with the FAA whether or not they have a vehicle that is conforming or close to conforming, right? So, Brian can comment on this, but Joby's been in tight talks with the FAA. I know Greg on their team is really close, has been sort of associated with Gamma and a few other organizations. Tom Prevo and other folks on the Joby team have been talking with FAA and NASA for airspace management, specifically focused on people moving applications. And this is just Joby. Like, the other players have also had discussions related to things like remote ID or BV loss in some of the FAA IPP programs, or NASA's national campaign and the X3 and X4 airspace management tests. So there's been a lot that's been worked on that maybe isn't as public facing, but if you dig deep enough, you'll see that the undercurrents are swelling. And again, there's a lot of this happening in parallel, such that a service in 2024 is not unreasonable, assuming that they get final sign off on the conforming prototypes and they're able to get all the other requisite services in place.
Hey, great. That's really encouraging to see that the regulators are more engaged than I would think. That's fantastic.
Yeah, they're definitely not leading the charge. They definitely want the companies to take the lead, but they're, in my view, they're highly engaged. I think certainly more so than they were with drones, 5 years ago, much to the chagrin of the drone folks. And I think you can kind of understand why, right? When it comes to drones, from the FAA's perspective, drones are nothing but like a damage point, right? Like there's no upside to letting drones into the airspace, certainly quickly without, a proper oversight and everything. And so they moved, I think, very slowly on that. And there also wasn't a ton of money, or the big players involved in the early days of drones, when people were hoping that would make, much more rapid progress. Sorry, got a call. You look today at what's going on with eVTOLs, and it's like exponentially more money involved and more upside, and also players like Boeing and Airbus and Hyundai are involved. So I think it was very there's a lot more pressure on the FAA to take it seriously, and they have. Like Ian was saying, I think it's reasonable that this service could start in some way, shape, or form and around the time frame that these companies are looking at. I would caveat and say that, in my view, if Joby, if Archer, if some of these companies with incredibly complex eVTOLs are able to get them certified in the next 3 years, I think that would be all right, keeping this call. My dad wants to talk to me for some reason. I'll get back to him later. I think it would be a coup if they were able to pull that off. There's so many examples of aircraft programs with so many novel parts that just do not hit their timelines. So we'll see. But regardless, I think the main point is when you're talking about timeline and urban air mobility, I think people have seen, the stuff that Uber Elevate put out, and they see 2023 and autonomous air taxis, and they kind of put the two together in their mind. And it's important to separate these out. So when Ian talks about, scaled operations in the 2030s or 2028 timeframe, I think that's appropriate, and so the early aircraft that get certified and start flying around, they're going to be doing much what helicopters are doing today. And then slowly they're going to start to do more interesting operations, so that the revolutions that we're talking about here are happening, sequentially. They're not all happening at once. You're not going to have these entirely new airframes with entirely new propulsion systems flying, entirely new missions autonomously all at once. It's going to be bit by bit, and then eventually get to the point where much more interesting things are happening that actually create a large market. That's what I think.
Hey, thanks for that, guys. Hey, I wanted to continue to allow people to ask questions. I have a series of questions I want to ask, but I want to make sure that people, from the listening room have a chance to ask a question. Travis, we brought you up. Do you have a question or a comment on the dialogue here today?
Yeah, I've got a lot of history working with the FAA, having been in manufacturing myself. And so, kind of agree with Brian that, government is involved. The FAA and NASA announced, a ConOps version 1. They put out a report last June, I believe. So that's available on their website if you wanted to look at, kind of where their head is at and where they're going forward. But, just to comment and agree with Brian, you can have the best laid plans, but the government getting them, used to or comfortable with new technologies, it just takes time. And I think 2023 is, boy, that's a pipe dream. That's gonna be a while before you can bring these new technologies up to par on a mass scale.
Yeah, it's definitely going to take time. I just want to just to piggyback on that. There's actually two separate concept of operations documents that have been put out, one by the FAA and one by NASA, and they're different. The FAA one is looking at what are the early days of these aircraft and these UAM operations going to look like? And the NASA one is, what are scaled operations down the road going to look like? And so it's kind of interesting to see, you've got the FAA very much engaging, like we've been saying, and trying to figure out how do we get there from the early days. And NASA, of course, as NASA does, is looking more, further out into the future and trying to say, how do we integrate, for example, autonomous aircraft? How do we figure out the potential failure modes that we need to account for in order to have autonomous aircraft carrying passengers around and integrate that into the airspace and running the tests, there. So you see, like, for example, WISC, which is a spinoff from Kitty Hawk. It's a joint venture from Kitty Hawk and Boeing. So the Kitty Hawk side of that has been building and flying eVTOLs for almost 10 years now. And the WISC side has gone fully autonomous. And they're flying, tons of airframes. Have done over 1,000 test flights, I think, across California and New Zealand, focused again on this fully autonomous approach. And right now, really, they have no path to certification and service in the United States. It doesn't exist. And so, they may or may not have an aircraft flying with paying customers. I would say it's doubtful they will in the next 5 years. Maybe they'll have that happen in New Zealand or elsewhere where they can get regulators to work with them a bit differently. But just people that have taken that fully autonomous approach, no path to certification today.
Thanks. That's really interesting. Hey, Travis, I wanted to add on to what you had said. Is I personally have been involved in the aviation aerospace industry for probably 40 years, at this point, and so I've worked with regulators in lots of different projects for years and years and years. And I know people have different schools of thought, but the direction that I've seen to be the most successful in working with regulators is for private industry or for businesses to be able to tell them what they're doing and then get acceptance from the regulators on what they're doing. And my opinion always is that we shouldn't be looking to the regulators to set the direction and the things that we should be doing, because if we're doing that, then we're putting overly influenced restrictions on what we're doing, and that doesn't mean that we don't operate safely, and that doesn't mean that we don't operate efficiently and put good things in place that the FAA wouldn't agree with, or that EASA or anyone wouldn't agree with. It just means that we take the lead in defining what the business needs to do to be successful. And then when we do that we get their acceptance and get their guidance, and we bring them early and often in the discussions so that we arrive at a conclusion together jointly, which meets both the business and the regulatory requirements. And so it's always been my opinion that the private industry needs to take the lead in order to create a successful operation, which includes the regulators, not asking them what to do. That's just the position that I take.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Mark. This was not meant to stand back and say, tell us what to do, but more of my concern, and I'm sure others have dealt with this before. It just takes time to get the FAA comfortable with these new technologies, and it takes a lot of horsepower from private industry, kind of working with these folks, doing lots of tests, inviting them out to their facilities, showing them the safety aspects. All these things just take time.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Sure.
I wasn't implying that you were, saying that was the direction that you were going. I was just providing additional comment and support to what you were saying. Yeah. Ian, did you have something to add?
Yeah. Just I resonate with that. I mean, any serious player, again, has been talking to the FAA for a while. Joby, for example, has been in talks since, I want to say, 2016. So anyone that's been flying or seeks to fly in the U.S. and also operate a service, by the time we get to like 2024, they will have had, let's call it 7 to 8 years of in-depth discussion specifically on an airframe that they'd want to launch with.
And by the way, I think Pipistrel came out the other day and revealed that the end-to-end certification process for the Velis Electro, the 2C electric aircraft that is, I think, the first certified electric aircraft in the world in Europe. The end-to-end, it was less than 3 years, the process for that. So it is possible. Of course, that's a far less complicated aircraft, than Joby or Archer is looking to certify, but it's the world's first electric aircraft.
Well, even if you look at like the SF-50 or the SR-20 from Cirrus, and you go from first, I guess, initial prototype all the way to the end of cert, that looks like 5 to 6 years, I think. Last time I checked like my studies of it. So again, not saying that it's 100% the same as an eVTOL, but it's still within the right scoping time-wise.
So I want to I wanted to shift the discussion just a little bit and continue sort of a path that we were taking earlier. I wanted to ask the people that are in the room here is that all of us want to emphasize, the success of aviation, and we want to emphasize the success of urban air mobility. And so I guess I wanted to ask the knowledgeable people in the room is that what should people be doing? People in this room should be doing, what should business be doing in order to be able to help promote. And I might have asked the question of saying, what are the obstacles to getting there? But I'd like to turn that around and saying, what should people be doing to help promote? What should businesses do to be able to support this? And how do we accelerate this to go faster, than what it would go if it just went its normal course? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's only a handful of really serious OEMs that will be able to launch in the near term. So anyone that's looking to provide value in the near term should figure out who those players are, and then understand where in the value chain they can help out. So, for example, if I believe that Joby is going to be a first mover, probably doesn't make sense to go and try and sell them motors, because they've already developed their electric motors for a conforming prototype and are well on their way to getting that all the way through. However, if I'm thinking about this from an operations standpoint or insurance standpoint or an infrastructure standpoint, all of those are opportunities, right? I think it's important to remember all the things that aren't the airframe, because the airframe ends up being the sexy object that lots of people cling to. But in reality, it's only one piece of a much bigger ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And one of the challenges I think that people have, of course, is seeing who those leading players are, or those prominent players. But like just for example, is that I am not a significant player in urban air mobility. All right, but I'm very interested in seeing aviation progress, and I'm looking for new opportunities within aviation. I've been running a program with Larry, my business partner, Larry. They're focusing on recovery in aviation for the last year. We've done about 300 live broadcasts, 300 plus live broadcasts on LinkedIn with different businesses to try to help promote, recovery in aviation. And so I have a significant interest in things which will help promote aviation and success in aviation. And so, I myself, for example, said, hey, I want to focus on urban air mobility, even though I'm not an expert in this space. I think I can curate bringing some people together and bring up a conversation and get more people interested and get more engagement on it. And so, that's my part of contribution. And I know people like Mike who are in, manufacturing and aerospace, and he's in the lubricant space. He's saying, how can I figure out how to be a player, going forward in the industry? And so, one of the main reasons that I wanted to bring this conversation together with people in this room is to, just foster the conversation, to be able to bring people together and to be able to help get ideas going and get thoughts flowing. But one of the next things I wanted to ask, maybe in my next question, is what do we think the risks are of moving forward? Is where are the obstacles, not maybe the risks and obstacles? What are the things that are going to prevent us from going forward and being successful?
I mean, again, I think it comes down to CERT being one of the major barriers up front. If you can't get past an aircraft CERT, then you have no service. I think the second is going to be actually generating the demand and then funneling that through your service, which again is not an easy thing. And really only Blade and Uber have done that. And specifically only Uber from a multimodal standpoint. So I think those are the two main ones. Local governments play a pretty big factor there as well. But it's not necessarily as hard a requirement as that upfront cert.
I kind of want to hear what everyone else thinks about that question, Mark, because I've been so tunnel focused, laser focused on eVTOL and these aircraft and everything. I mean, people that are outside of this space looking in, I'm really curious what people think are the obstacles.
I think I agree with Ian, but I would probably add on a few things. So another thing that I personally value a lot is, to finally, when we ultimately goes to the market eventually, we need to find the true users. And these people, we a lot of people want to use aircraft. We want to fly into city environments. We dream to have flying cars. But when it's down to the true scenarios, where the people are willing to take a risk of flying in cities, or it's just really going to save people's travel time, or make people live better. And the public acceptance is obviously, when we go down to the actual market, it's gonna be a very, very a big matter of it. Another thing is, I think the safety issue is definitely the most important thing. Obviously in the aviation industry and all the regulations, they value a lot. So I think this is also something that a lot of companies will have to face, how they ensure all the standards and all the safety requirements, for all the vehicles and for the public. And we're talking about urban environments. It's very complicated. Other than all the flying experiences that a lot of people are facing. It's not only about people in the vehicle. It's about all other people in cities. We're talking about billions of people, and so yeah, it all goes down to the how ensure the safety and how people can accept this kind of business models, or taking the services.
Yeah, safety definitely. Yep. Go ahead, Travis. Yep.
Oh, I just had one question, and I'd like to gain people's thoughts on market. Obviously COVID has severely impacted aviation, but more recently we're seeing a trend of folks moving outside of the city, right? And we're seeing an increased level of companies that are allowing employees to work from home. I think recently United is going to pull out of 2 floors of the Willis Tower, and they're going to allow their folks to work remotely or somewhere else. So, what kind of impact does that have? Because the model is to, have these, UAM ports on top of big buildings, and, move people from there to the airports quickly and efficiently. What does that mean when folks are working from home, right? What's the impact of that? So I'm just curious if anybody thought about that.
It's interesting. I think none of us know, if this is going to be a trend that reverses or a trend that sticks or what, but it's interesting because I think it could go a number of ways. For one, you could imagine, let's say you have an opportunity to move, far out of the city and gain all the advantages of that, and work from home 80% of the time, and maybe have to be in the office once a week or something like that. And think about what the cost of your, commute was pre-COVID. I don't know, maybe companies are giving you $200 a month or whatever to pay for Metro or something like that. And now that $200 a month could pay for an air taxi flight back and forth once a week, and it'll be about the same cost. And you have this kind of hybrid remote work model that costs the same in terms of commuting. Something like that could be an option. So I don't know. There's so many ways that this could play out, and I think we don't know, if this past year is really going to reverse the for all of human history, the march toward urbanization. But who knows? So much of the economic structure of cities is based on the efficiency of hiring and firing people, and how many jobs you have access to within a certain radius. And so if remote work all of a sudden becomes something that is like, what 30% of the world does that completely blow up the efficiency of cities? That's a much larger conversation than aerospace and urban air mobility, but who knows?
I don't know, guys. My opinion is this: is that there is no way that it will not stick. In my opinion, and I'll just tell you why I think is it isn't just because of the thrill of aviation, and it isn't because of people working at home. I think it's because the most valuable commodity in the world is time. That's my opinion. All right, and because you can buy time by being able to get places faster by flying and not be in traffic jams and go where you want to go and when you want to be there, on a more convenient schedule. I just think that there's no way of stopping this, and I think that, public will accept it because we're very impatient people and we want things now. And there's just no way that trend in this world will ever reverse. And, time, in my opinion, being the most valuable commodity, would drive me to do it over anything. All right. I saw that the helicopter service in Sao Paulo had been implemented in the past by Airbus. I've never used it, but I personally have sat in a car, going from Guarulhos Airport in Sao Paulo down to Congonhas Airport, taking 3.5 or 4 or 5 hours in traffic to be able to get there when a helicopter could have gotten there, in, I don't know what, 15 minutes or something. There is just no way we're going to stop the convenience of getting this kind of travel in place. That's just my opinion.
Mark, I totally agree, but I think that, to play devil's advocate, I mean, there are different ways that you can get time back, right? If we move to a world where we're all zipping around in autonomous cars and we don't have to do anything in the car, and we can sit there alone with our friends, do whatever we want, have perfect internet connection, etc. You get your time back that way too, even if your commute still takes whatever amount of time. So, there's different ways you can get your time back. And I think it's the same when it comes to flight too, right? Like, I mean, there's more to this than this is a tiny piece of the puzzle, but, looking at like Concorde and what happened, why there isn't who knows? Because there's so many companies that are pursuing supersonic jets today and have raised so much money to do so. But, a supersonic jet made a lot more sense when flying like sucked and there's like nothing you could do during flight. You're just sitting there. Now, like, you have great internet connection, you can do all sorts of things. You can bring your iPad loaded up with a million of your favorite movies and TV shows. It's not as big of a deal. And so there's just different ways you can get your time back. And so I fully agree with the concept you're pushing, but I'm just playing devil's advocate a little bit.
No, that's a really good point. And I think all those factors are going to play together and make the decision on how quickly that it accelerates. Maybe for me personally is, aviation isn't just a passion, it's an obsession. I think it came when the day that my dad stood me on the wing of an airplane when I was 2 years old, and then it didn't stop ever since then, with me on my elbows watching the first moon landing to, getting my pilot license when I was, before I could drive a car, So I think that, I think all those things, play into, I think the intrigue of aviation and all the things that we do, I think we'll continue to accelerate that. But thanks, I really appreciate that. Hey, listen, everybody, I want to give one last call for questions because it wasn't an intent to run this room, for a long, long time. I had originally scheduled this room for an hour, and my goal is to be able to begin to curate this audience of people around the subject of urban air mobility, and then to repeat that on a weekly basis. So this is part 1 of 3 right now. So for the next 3 weeks at 10:30 Pacific time, we're going to run this room. And next week, we're going to focus on technology. We're going to try to have a bit of a discussion around technology. What technology is being used and why, and what's good and what's not, and see if we can get a conversation going around that. But before I wrap things up, I want to see if there was anybody else in the room that had questions. You can raise your hand and you can ask a question. And I also wanted to give a chance for any of the speakers that are on the stage right now to add any final inputs as I'm trying to sort of bring this thing to a close.
Hey, Mark, I'd just like to say this, Mike. Thanks for your passion for the industry and the support that you lend to all of us and getting the word out. And appreciate everything you do, my friend.
Thanks a lot. Hey, and for those of you that are in the room today that do have expertise in this area, I was trying to market this to a lot of different people, and I really, really appreciate you coming and being part of this conversation because most of you, I know quite a few of you that are in the room, but a lot of you, I don't know you, and I appreciate you coming here and being part of this conversation. It's what makes it interesting. And so I wanted to invite you to come back next week as we talk about technology for urban air mobility. And also, if you know other people that would add value to the conversation, I would really appreciate it. One of the biggest things that we're trying to do is, yes, we're trying to promote these things and promote aviation, promote urban air mobility, but also I'm trying to create networks. I'm trying to create connections between people. I have made so many amazing connections on Clubhouse so far, and they've led to doing business together, and they've led to me getting to know interesting new people and learning a lot of new things. And so I would really encourage you to, if you're down in the audience, is to follow the people that are in this room. You can do that by, if you're new, you can see that you can do that just by clicking on their face and then pressing the follow button. If you're not part of the club, you can click on that little green house up there next to Aviation Aerospace and you can follow the club. And I would like to ask you very much if you would invite people to come to this room next week at 10:30 Pacific time, where we'll continue to talk about urban air mobility. So if that's it for now, I really appreciate everybody being here, and I'll leave this room open just for a second in case there's people that want to follow additional people, because I know at the when people close rooms real quick that you don't always get a chance to follow people. So I'm going to leave it open just for a couple of minutes, and you can feel free to leave at any time and follow anybody on the stage, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much.